It's the Plain and Traditions channel, presented by Moses.
Hello and welcome to the Plain and Traditions channel. My name is Kendra Moses, and as always we have our resident chef Kai off camera. So this week we're going to be talking about association. Now association can be a very interesting word because there's all types of ways in which the word association comes up in our day-to-day lives. But today, being that it's a food-related program, we're going to focus on food association. Now, over the course, we have been discussing associating food basically with certain sentiments, with certain memories, certain feelings, so to speak, personal feelings. But today, we're stepping away from that a little bit, and we're going to discuss how other people associated food. So even with focusing on the food association that others have had over the course of time, again, we're still not really going deep down into like personal feeling about their taste preferences or any feelings or any attachments necessarily to family or a memory of gatherings, so to speak. Food has been so intricate in our lives that there was a point in time where it was more than just something we just did to survive. Food ended up being a part of a complete system of how we encountered one another in our day-to-day lives in a societal manner. And again, this had nothing really to do with breaking bread with someone or sitting down to eat at the table. There was a time where, and there's still a time now, hence that's why you're able to be bombarded by so many people talking at you all about food over so many different channels just on YouTube, and that has nothing to do with anything else on the mainstream. It's just that everyone is finding out for themselves about food in some sort of fashion for the first time. And when we think about the past, as far as we know, we can only really go by recorded history and time. And either with things like the cave drawings and stuff of that nature, they gave us an idea of the things that they noticed and the things that was important to them enough to carve sketchings on a cave. But it's still not as in-depth as we convey things today, at least from a recorded part of stance. Like even this show is a recorded part of stance. It's not necessarily written down, but right now, as soon as I upload this will be up on the web for many, 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 many years to come. It doesn't really matter about any type of influence I may have or anything else. It's just one of those things that we have gotten to a point now that everything that we share with each other has been passed on through all types of media and forms, and these things are just out there. It would take a lot for these things just to fade into the distance. So the good or the bad, we are definitely a species who enjoy voicing many of our ideals and feelings amongst the masses. With that said, it's easier to kind of discern someone telling you verbatim or writing verbatim exactly what this meant to them, what that drawing meant to them, if they included any illustration, or what a specific item meant to them. So we don't really have to go through the process of interpreting things like we would have for the ancient civilizations, unless they wrote it down in a language that can be translated by our historians today. So when we focus on the word association today for the focal point of the food, I'm specifically referring to food in general. I'm really not trying to discern any preferences amongst anyone for this. I'm referring to over the recorded point of times. What has food meant to the people before us that does not have anything to do with a favorite food as far as enjoying the taste of it, but what did the food mean to them? What was immediately associated with the food in question? What was associated with the food, any food in question, when someone mentioned a certain food or was shown a certain food? If you're a foodie, if you're someone who really enjoys the process of cooking and really enjoys the process of eating and being around that environment, food can have a way of seeming priceless to you. So that would mean that you would end up paying a great deal of money and spending a great deal of time in order to indulge in your favorite foods. When we think about having to foot the bill for our food, we are thinking about another thing in question. We're not associating the food to the money or currency. At the very least, we're associating food with costs, but we're not associating food with money. So you ask, what's the difference? Or you proclaim or protest right now, there is no difference. There is a difference in regards to the food association for now and the food association for the ancient times. When it comes to us purchasing our food or thinking about going out there to obtain it from any type of store or vendor, whoever, we know we need a form of currency. However, the currency differs from the food. But back in the ancient times, that wasn't necessarily the case. In the ancient times, food was so valuable and had such a, mystical meaning or appearance to it. You have all these wondrous things that we are able to enjoy, that we depend on for our livelihoods. We take into our bodies and we feel invigorated. We feel our energy returning to us, especially if we had a long stint of not eating. But when we think about these things as conscious beings, we end up finding ourselves giving a sense of identity and worth to things, or that ironically, as even more time passed, we're not really given the same credence to it as those people in the ancient times. So it's a strange thing, but we find all throughout history, we find ourselves either reconnecting with something or having ourselves go through a basic cycle in which we're rediscovering things, or we have to rediscover things. So we think about our past renditions of ourselves, the ones that we said that didn't have the type of mindset that we have, presumably, because we're not familiar with their way of life. We're not familiar with any written accounts by them. We're not familiar with any spoken word or text by them. So we make these assumptions that they probably didn't have a great understanding. And this may or may not be true. I've never been that comfortable about saying that other renditions of ourselves, going back like to the caveman days, weren't clear about what was going on. I can go by the accounts of the ancient civilizations that came after them. And those civilizations were able to write down things, their feelings about seeing a food and what it means to them. And food was such a great thing that it was something to be offered to their gods and altars. And right now, we don't do that. If we do have a particular belief system, it's more accustomed to offer them tidings of currency. There may be times now still where there could be a bartering system, but we even tapered off on that. Because the interesting thing about our ancient civilizations, or our past civilizations, the ones that aren't so ancient, when they started exploring, they started noticing different food items all over the place. And this was addition to everything else, but we're focusing on food. So they went and explored, and they started noticing different spices, different plants, different animals, different food types of all sorts. And being that we had branched ourselves off, we had started off as a basic cluster, and then in our nomadic fashion, we ended up traveling all over the world. And then when the Earth started changing its formation, the opportunity to travel as freely across the land became more difficult because now we're looking at what was once a big massive land has basically separated itself, and now there's large body of waters between them. And so it wasn't as feasible or possible to go back and forth in that regular nomadic fashion that they did. And even when they did get the opportunity and the development to build things like ships, canoes, rafts, whatever they could, it was still something that wasn't really readily available for everyone. So when we had people like our explorers, and they started traveling to go see what other lands look like and what they have for them, anything they brought back that was exotic, and exotic had a different definition then. Exotic now for us may have to be something really extreme, but back then, exotic could have been bringing back a pineapple. If they bring back a pineapple to their land, something that is scarce where they're from, that pineapple had great value. Even though it's not going to last long, it had great value. Back then, when you see a pineapple, it was a sign of wealth and opulence. A peasant couldn't get a pineapple. A peasant could barely get from one place to the other without having to work and scrape. Only the rich could have the ability to be able to go to a land far away and then bring back something like this. To have something be given a value that can equate the worth of the clothes on your back, the roof over your head, your next meal, and something that is actually edible can help get you a meal, but be thinking about it outside the standpoint of using these as ingredients. These are being used possibly as ingredients, but these are mainly being used as a form of currency. And salt wasn't the only thing. Other items of currency included tea and even cocoa. So in our ancient civilizations, Latin was a particularly common language, just as common as our English. And so salary is actually associated with the word salt, because the word salary in Latin is salarium, which means salt, money. See, your worth in salt meant how much you would get paid in salt. So if someone tells you you're worth your weight in salt, that was a particularly good thing to be associated with, because your weight in salt has to do with the word salarium, which meant salt money, because that is how people were paid back then, with salt. They would do all renditions of jobs, and they were paid in salt. So salt was the form of their currency. Food was the form of their currency. So it's interesting to me now that salt has a particularly dubious association, whereas back in the ancient times around 50 BC, salt had a very positive association, because anyone who was doing a job, or a lot of people who were doing a job, were expecting to be paid literally in salt. So to be worth their weight in salt, that means they were in for a big payday. That had a very positive association. As where today, salt is either here nor there, or salt is either vilified for its potential to cause you health concerns, or glorified for its potential to bring a dish to life. But again, there's a big of a dubious quality now to the association when we think about, okay, I'm going to put before you a bowl of salt. For today, that association Again, like I said, a bit dubious. But back in the ancient times, to be presented with a bowl of salt would have been a very positive association indeed. Now, it's an interesting thing to think about food being currency, but this was a particular account of how the way the societies before us had their dealings. And again, there is something that we probably still familiar with now called the bartering system. And bartering, the food is still not quite considered currency. The food is just considered as you have something I want, I have something you want. And I know it still sounds like a regular run-of-the-mill transaction. However, these things only had worth to those two individuals or whoever was in the dealing of trading their food items. The food itself still did not remain currency, or still could not claim itself as currency in a bartering situation. Because in a bartering situation, those two people have to really want what is being offered. They can't really pass it on to someone else without having to see if this person really likes this food. So mainly when you're thinking about for our transactions for a bartering system, we're talking about two sets of people or two individuals who are looking at very specific food items that they want, and they said, okay, we'll make a trade, we'll barter. However, they can't take these items and then say, I want to purchase cloth or fabric from your stall, or I want to get a trinket or some sort of jewelry that was made at the time, or a sandal or any type of garment. They could not just take any old thing up to a vendor or a salesperson unless that salesperson was actually willing to render their goods to them in order for them to say, okay, I just traded off some random piece of food. Now you give me your goods. That only works if the seller is willing to make that particular bargain. The days of bartering really have dwindled quite a bit. I'm not saying it's completely depleted. I just know that where I'm from, you can barter if you have a close relationship with the person, you're familiar with each other, and you said, again, it's like this same premise all throughout time with the bartering system. You have something I want, I have something you want. And that's when that can happen. There's typically no way, though, now in our current society that we can say, okay, I have my favorite piece of food and you're going to go to a grocer and say, but you all have a lot of food here, so you're just going to take the food that I have and I'm just going to take my pick of anything I want here. That's not going to work. That's actually going to go down very badly indeed. And even if there was any possibility for that to occur, you will have to be dealing with someone who actually owns their business or establishment and is willing to do this either because they want or a kindness of their heart. With so many businesses, especially the grocers that we go to now, being franchises, they are not willing or they cannot do a particular exchange or transaction in that matter. So that's why I said there is a difference between food being associated with cost versus food being associated with currency. Of course, we know we need currency. We need either a debit card, a credit card, cash, whatever, in order to purchase our food. So after we have discerned what it is that we want to buy or purchase, we immediately associate it with how much money that's going to cost us. And then we go to something else. We go to our currency then. We stop looking at the food. We don't look at the food again until we go to the store. But for an immediate shopping list, the things that we associate first is the need of the food or the want of the food, and then how much it may cost us. That's our immediate association typically. And then from that point, we think about how we're going to purchase it. But at that point, The food is just the item that we're considering. It's not the thing that we're going to be able to use directly, or it's not associated that directly with currency, because it's something that we cannot use in our world of today. We cannot do this, or is not typically done anymore in our society. The bartering or the use of food for currency. If we want food now, we need currency. But it's amazing to me that the food has so much wonder still. The food has so much value still. And I think I enjoy that part of history, or knowing that part about history, is because we're looking at a time where we didn't take anything for granted. To see food associated with currency, you know you can eat if you have a food item. And the difference between this and bartering is that the food items that were used as currency were particularly not that difficult to find at that time within those regions that accepted those particular food as currency. So salt was not particularly that difficult to get their hands on. So they were able to say, we can use this as currency. So they still had the same thought patterns as we do for our treasury. Whenever there's a bill shortage, as in dollar bills, or a coin shortage, we look to the treasury, we look at the availability, and then they make a decision based on that as to maybe you should just do all debit items now, you do all credit. We have to scale back on the use of our currency, or we have to find a way to increase the output of our currency back into our economical system. So it's the exact same thing, but using food. But yeah, it's truly something to think about and consider. And while we haven't completely carried on these trends and cultures of allowing food to be our currency and be something that we can absolutely attain almost anything we want with, we still kind of have that mindset when it comes to it. We imagine our cocoa turn to our favorite chocolate bar. And one of the biggest advertising terminology is calling it rich chocolate. And a lot of companies do this, and they've been doing it for a long time. But you don't necessarily have to be rich to have it. But it's a sensation that it gives you, that this food item that was derived from a cocoa bean, something that was actually used for currency, something that you had abundance of it, you were indeed rich. You had affluence. You've given that food a sense of value that was very synonymous to the people that became many, many years before us. We could carry on this trend actually in our own ways by the way that we do value the food and how it does create that ambiance of, I guess, affluence, a richness, something that you know that is attainable because you have it. And to feel that same way about a food, even in this point of time, is something to truly give a thought to. Because in a world where, like I said, many of us are just eating to eat because it's part of the contractual deal. You were born this species, you have to eat to survive. But how many of us really, really value the food that we eat? Is it just something that we have because it's something we could get our hands on? Or is it something that truly has a sense of value to us that we can actually begin to put a monetary price tag on? Because we can't, like I said, unless you have a particular interaction with someone, you can't barter with it anymore, and we certainly can't buy anything with it anymore. But does that truly mean that the food has lost its value? how can we go about either preserving, if nothing more, this thought process of looking at food and thinking that it can actually help you to obtain something, even more than a good mood or even more than staving off hunger. To think that something that is not necessarily an abundance of everything. Unfortunately, as time passed, that has become quite iffy as well. But to think about it having a value like it used to have back then. There's a lot of things in history that does seem to repeat themselves, that seems to go through a cycle of a state of familiarity, even if you're comparing two different centuries. So do you think we'll ever come back to the point where we're looking at our food and thinking about it as currency? And if we ever do, would it be like those dystopian movies that we show for our questionable futures? Or can it actually have the same positive worth that it used to have all those years ago? I truly think there's something to think about. So I invite you all to just give a thought about that.
Long ago, there was something found in the trees that was deemed so special it was thought to be a gift from above. It's called chocolate. And today is World Chocolate Day. Once used as currency, it gives rich a whole new meaning. It's definitely one for the journal. Available at Amazon.com and Blurb.com. Just search keywords, Play Traditions Recipe Journal. Thank you again for joining us for another week. We hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye.